everybody to our first in the season of Zooviews. We will be bringing you several more experts to talk about the animals we have at the zoo over the next few months. So please follow us on social media, on our website to learn about the dates and the times. I would like to introduce myself correctly. My name is Sarah Ducette. I am one of the directors of Friends of Hyde Park Zoo. And unfortunately, the zoo is closed, as you all know, so we are not able to be there. However, we did get extra special permission for just to have Amy go in so she can introduce you to our reindeer. So I'm going to hand over to Amy to introduce you to our beautiful reindeer.
So hi everyone, my name is Amy. I'm here at the zoo, as Sarah was just saying, very specially as the zoo is still closed. And I am going to flip and show you our reindeer enclosure. So these are our Hyde Park Zoo signs that have a little bit of fun information about our reindeer. They were hanging out with me just over here, and now our reindeer are nice at the back, just behind that Christmas tree hanging up there. So, you know, classic animals not being super helpful, but we have Holly and Snowflake just back there. They use this hanging Christmas tree as a toy and to help scratch the velvet off their ear or their antlers. So Snowflake is the mother, she's about 5, and Holly is her daughter, her second calf, who's just 1 year old now. You can almost not tell them apart. Holly is still a little bit smaller than Mom, but they're growing and being lovely together. And both reindeer were born at the Hyde Park Zoo. So we have our lovely resident reindeers, and we're excited to hear more about them.
All right, thank you, Amy. And just for you who are tuning in now, you can see behind me, this is Snowflake with Holly about a year ago. So baby reindeer are quite different colors, but I'm not going to go into detail about reindeer because I'm not an expert on reindeer. Before I do introductions though, I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping. We will keep you all muted so you can hear the presentation, and we will be keeping your cameras off. If you have questions, please enter it into the chat at the bottom of your screen. And after Karly has finished her presentation, either she will be reading through some of the questions, or Anna, who is our producer today from Friends of Hyde Park Zoo, or myself will be asking Karly all the very intricate questions which people have about caribou, or are they reindeer? Good question. Anyway, let me please introduce you to Karly, who is an educator and communicator for Parks Canada. She works with amazing biologists and ecologists to tell stories and teach Canadians about the unique mountain caribou herds that live in Jasper National Park. She's lived in Jasper for 10 years and is in awe of the national park's beauty every day. So Karly is in Jasper right now, 2 hours behind us. So thank you, Karly, for joining us. I am so looking forward to learning more about reindeer caribou. So I'm handing it over to you now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Yes, I am in Jasper today, and it is one of those days that I am in awe. It's a bluebird day. There's lots of snow on the mountain still, and I wish that was what you were seeing behind me. Yes, so thank you so much for having me. It was really fun to see the reindeer at the zoo today. I think typical caribou or reindeer behavior, just hiding out. They're a little camera shy maybe. And yes, I work here as an outreach and education officer, and so I'm not a biologist myself, but I work really closely with, we have a dedicated caribou biologist here in Jasper National Park, and a team that works on caribou conservation. And so I'm really happy to join you today to talk about caribou and why they're so important to Canadians. And so I thought I'll just share my screen here, and maybe somebody can give me a little thumbs up or Yahoo if you can see it. I see a thumbs up from Anna. Thank you. So this is a picture of some caribou in the Tonkin Valley of Jasper National Park. We have 3 herds here that live in various parts of the park. And I'm happy to talk about them today. And I'm going to talk a little bit about where we are in the world. So just to orient you, I am located in the Rocky Mountains of Alberta, and there's a series of mountain parks that protect a large swath of beautiful mountain landscapes. And so I just wanted to orient you to that, sorry. And so in talking about caribou, Sarah mentioned that I'm talking about caribou and that the animals at the zoo are referred to as reindeer. And so caribou and reindeer are the same species, although they're very different animals. So in North America, we call caribou caribou, and in Europe, they're called reindeer. We also in North America often call caribou that are domesticated or that are in captivity or in agriculture reindeer. And although caribou and reindeer are one species, across the world they are very varied in how they look and act because of their adaptations to their environments. They're really specific to where they live, and they're able to live in really harsh environments in Canada's cold landscapes, so they're really true Canadians. So I just want to talk about how caribou are related to other species. So caribou are part of the deer family. That family includes mule deer, white-tailed deer, elk, moose, and caribou. Caribou are similar in size in height to deer, but they're a lot bulkier, a lot heavier. Elk and moose are larger in the deer family. A caribou height-wise is often about half the size of a door, say, like where your doorknob is. And then a moose would be like the size of a pickup truck, and an elk is about as tall as a horse. So within the deer family, they have common characteristics. So things that are common amongst them is that they have 4 toes, and they have hooves. So this is a caribou print, and here you can see their 4 toes. In the other species, in deer, elk, and moose, usually you only see, if you see a print, you only see their 2 top toes. And that's where the majority of the weight of the body is supported on these 2 front hooves. They all have these back, what they're called dew claws. They're tinier toes in the back. But caribou have much larger ones that allow them to have the biggest foot out of all the deer family. And that is what lets them walk in deep snow. So their foot can spread out nice and wide. You can see it's almost the size of my hand. So they have a nice big snowshoe that they can walk on top of the snow. Their hooves also give them lots of stability on rock and ice. They're nice big paddles, so they're good swimmers. And they can also use them to dig in the snow in the winter, particularly looking for food. So that is kind of how you can tell the difference. If you're looking at tracks, you would, for deer, elk, and moose, you'd mostly just see the 2 front toes. And for caribou, you would see this full print with the 2 dew claws in the back. Another common characteristic that they have is 4-part stomach. So they are ruminants. They eat vegetation. They're vegetarians. And they have 4 parts in their stomach that allows them to digest all of that vegetation that they eat. Another common characteristic that you can see in the pictures here is that they all grow antlers. So antlers are made of bone. And I have an example here of a small caribou antler. And All of the deer family grow antlers. However, caribou are very special in that both the males and females grow antlers. So if Holly and Snowflake decide to come a little closer, maybe we could see if they have any antlers growing. And I think Sarah Anna mentioned velvet. So I also have an example of an antler with velvet on it. So both the caribou females and males grow antlers, and they start growing them in spring to early summer in the wild, and they keep them throughout the summer and into the fall. While they're growing, they have this beautiful fur on them, which we call velvet, and it is velvety. It's very soft, and underneath there's blood vessels that provide all the nourishment for growing those antlers. In the fall, when they're finished growing their antlers, the velvet starts to dry out and fall off, and so they will rub on things to try and get that off. And that's when you would see more of a bone-looking antler that people often find because they shed them in the fall. So you can find them on the ground. And the males lose theirs typically in November. And then they don't have antlers throughout the winter. And the females keep theirs. And the reason for that is because antlers are a sign of dominance. So the females are pregnant throughout the winter, and they keep their antlers, and they become the dominant members of the herd. And that way they can protect the best places to eat food and make sure they get all the energy they need to be healthy and have healthy babies in the spring. And so the females don't lose their antlers until the spring. Antlers so they fall off each year, and then they regrow them each year. And each year, as the animal gets a little bit older, the antlers sometimes get larger and a little bit more complex. Caribou also have the largest antlers compared to their body size of the family. And the picture here you see here, they do have quite a large set of antlers there. Just to give you a sense of where caribou are in Canada, this is a map from Canadian Geographic, and they really do live from coast to coast to coast. So in the green is woodland caribou species. There's 4 caribou subspecies in Canada. Woodland caribou typically live in the boreal forest, and then that also includes the mountain caribou here in Jasper National Park. That spend most of their time in the mountains at high elevation. There's also barren ground caribou further north, and those are the caribou that you may have seen pictures of, which are in herds of hundreds of thousands. Those caribou make some of the largest migrations of any land mammal in North America. And so they travel from forested areas in the south in the winter to the tundra in the summer, where they have their breeding or calving grounds, where they have their babies, and where they go and look for some great vegetation on the tundra in the summertime. Further north in the Arctic archipelago, there's also Piri Caribou, and that's a smaller species. As you go north, most caribou species, they get a little bit smaller and their coloring changes. So in the north, you'll see more white fur, whereas here in Jasper, our caribou are larger and they have darker coats. So I talked a little bit about how caribou are true Canadians, and they do live in really cold environments. And so they have these amazing adaptations that allow them to live in these places. And it's how they have learned to survive and thrive. So one of those, we talked about antlers. So sorry, this is a male antler and a female antler. So females typically have a little bit smaller antlers, and males will grow a larger set. And Their feet, we talked a little bit about. There's a picture here, so you can see their 2 hooves in the front, and the footprint with the 2 dew claws in the back, and that big snowshoe that allows them to walk on ice, rock, snow. They're in the tundra and the taiga. Sometimes they're on like mossy, wet areas, and makes them great swimmers. I talked about their coloring, their coats. So there's different coloring that you'll see and at different times of year. So woodland caribou are typically darker in the summer, and in the winter they'll grow a lighter, especially patch on their chest. Some of their cool adaptations for staying warm in these cold environments is having everything a little bit shorter and closer to the body. So compared to other deer members of the family, they have shorter tails and they have shorter ears. Oops. And so that allows them to keep that heat in closer to their body. They also have really warm coats. Their fur is hollow inside, so it allows air to be kept inside, and it's sort of like a down jacket. They have similar hair to, say, a polar bear, and that keeps them warm throughout really cold temperatures in the wintertime. They are also generally just covered in fur, so they have, their noses are covered in hair, their feet, and their ears, everything is furry. So they're a very furry animal, and that's another way that they stay warm. I talked about how their ears are a little bit smaller than deer or elk. Again, just keeping things closer to the body and keeping them warm. One of their other really amazing adaptations is that they are able to eat lichen. So all caribou are vegetarians, they eat vegetation. In the summertime, they'll eat a lot of shrubs, willow, mushrooms even, and then in the wintertime, there is not a lot of vegetation to be found. So one way they've adapted to avoid predators and to live in the environments they do is to eat lichen. It's a sort of mossy-like vegetation that grows at high elevations. You might have seen it also in trees. That's called arboreal lichen. And in interior British Columbia is where a lot of caribou there will eat lichen off the trees. Here in Jasper, they're typically getting lichen off of the ground. And in the wintertime, they'll use their hooves to dig up lichen on kind of rocky slopes. Lichen is fairly easy to digest, and it's high in, it's energy rich, so it helps them get through the winter. It doesn't have a ton of protein, so in the spring and summer, that's when they're going out and looking for that new green vegetation this time of year. So right now, caribou and Jasper are coming down further into the valleys looking for some of that new green growth that's slowly coming up. I also wanted to talk a little bit about how we know what we know about caribou. Here in Jasper National Park, we have a conservation program, and it involves monitoring caribou. And there's a few different ways that we do that. One of them is aerial surveys. So biologists use a helicopter to fly around caribou habitat. Just happens once a year. And they're essentially counting caribou. So they're looking for their tracks, looking for their what we call craters. So they create craters where they're digging for food and they're laying down in the snow. And they count caribou, they count the number of caribou, they can tell how many males and females there are and how many calves. Also, while these surveys are done, they will land in areas where caribou have left and have left their, their droppings. So they collect caribou scat or caribou poop, and we're able to take a sample of the mucus around that poo, and that has a sample of their DNA. And so the DNA is sent to a lab, and that is able to tell us a lot more information about individual caribou, and helps us estimate the population. Another way that we monitor caribou in the park is with remote wildlife cameras. So there's more than 100 wildlife cameras set up throughout the park, and we use them to monitor a variety of wildlife species. And one of them, we capture lots of animals on these cameras, and so we have images of caribou with calves, and we also use it to monitor wolves, which are their primary predator. And that way we can understand a little bit more about where the animals are spending their time, when those animals are coming in contact with each other. We can learn a little bit about how they're using the habitat within the park. And it does help us give an estimate of animals as well. Sometimes, especially with wolves, you can identify them just based on their markings and their colorings. And so we can use cameras to see what their range within their habitat is, and watch and see their babies and their calves, especially in the spring, see how they fared over the winter. So it's a great tool for us to monitor them from afar without bothering them in the least. So why are caribou so important? You know, they're a very iconic Canadian species. Many of us are familiar with them from being on our 25-cent coin. And I know that often we're very familiar with sort of those images of large herds of caribou crossing the tundra in northern Canada. They're a very significant species for a lot of Indigenous people. For centuries, they have provided food, shelter, and clothing, and they're an important cultural animal for many people. And they're also an indicator species. So what that means is that in the alpine environment particularly, and boreal, these really special ecozones and ecosites, they're an indication of how well things are going in that ecosystem. So without caribou, or when caribou are not doing well, that's an indication that that ecosystem isn't doing so well. Here in Jasper, we have the 3 herds that I mentioned, and they are endangered, and caribou are endangered across Canada. Partly that's because of the fact that because they're so adapted to their environments, it's one of their strengths, but it also makes them vulnerable to impacts to their habitat. So their biggest threats across Canada are habitat loss, or the loss of quality in their habitat, the amount of habitat they have. They require really large areas that are undisturbed in order to forage, to avoid predators, to migrate. Like I mentioned, the migrating herds in northern Canada, they go to certain areas to calve or have their calves. Here in Jasper, the woodland caribou or mountain caribou, they have a different strategy where they go kind of isolate themselves, and they find a quiet area in a protected area to have their calf and avoid predators. Here in a national park, obviously their habitat is protected, which is a great thing. And so our main focus is just making sure that we aren't disturbing them. Our human presence is not disturbing them. So some of their main threats are highways or roads. It's not a huge threat for them here in Jasper, but throughout Canada, that is a concern. They do come and cross a couple of roads within Jasper National Park and just outside Jasper National Park, especially this time of year. The Brazeau herd here crosses the Icefields Parkway in the springtime. And so we have a reduced speed limit there. And just north of Jasper National Park, the Alopesh herd, which lives partly within Jasper and partly outside of, they're partially migratory. So they do move a little bit back and forth between the mountains and the foothills. And they cross the highway as well. And so there's a Assiniboine-Winnewack Nation that has a caribou patrol program to help encourage people to slow down in that area and just avoid collisions on roads. Another threat to caribou in, say, a protected area is potentially fire. So wildfire is actually a beneficial and natural disturbance to forests, and we do encourage it to take place in our national parks when it's safe. But it does have the effect of disturbing old growth forest, which is caribou's favorite habitat. So we do have to be mindful of protecting enough old growth forest for caribou to still thrive. Outside of national parks, a lot of the threats for caribou involve just human development and industrial development. They're really affected by things that fragment their habitat, so roads, power lines, oil and gas, agriculture, forestry. So they're just really sensitive to changes in their habitat. And anything that, any development that we have that creates open areas attracts more of their relatives, deer and moose and elk, and that it can increase wolf populations. So their main predators are wolves, bears, sometimes wolverines, cougars, even bald eagles will prey on calves. And that's a natural part of their life, but we have to make sure that it's balanced here in the park. So I think just wanted to talk a little bit about, you know, what you can do. And so, you know, a big part is just learning more about caribou, learning about caribou in your area. It's a great way to start is to go to the High Park Zoo and see the animals there and get to know them and a little bit more about them. Another thing to do is just practice great environmental stewardship. So caribou, we don't know exactly the impacts of climate change on caribou, but because they are a northern species and that they're reliant on cold climates, it's certain that a warming climate will have some effect on them. Caribou herds used to exist a lot further south and into the United States, and their populations are decreasing there, and so you're seeing them, their existence go further and further north. So yeah, it's really important that we practice environmental stewardship and practices to mitigate climate change. And just be an advocate for caribou. They're such a beautiful species. They're so adaptive. They have these amazing adaptations. They have become these like winter experts. And so I'm just really proud to talk about them. I'm proud that we have them in Jasper National Park and across Canada. And I'm very pleased to have spent time with the High Park Zoo and across the country. It's an amazing thing. Unfortunate that, you know, the zoo is not open right now, but amazing that we can come together in this way. So.
Carly, thank you so much. I learned so many things and you answered all the questions I was going to ask you. We actually only have about 3 minutes left on this time. I apologize for that. Amy, can you see the caribou? Have they, our reindeer, have they come down to visit you yet? Or I'm not sure if Amy, yes?
Yes, they're down here. We're just bringing out some food so they can come and have a little bit of their close up at the fence here. So I'm going to turn my camera around and you'll be able to see our zookeepers here. And as you can tell, the reindeer saw them coming and are prancing around, happy to see their favorite people.
A rattling bucket of food always gets the reindeer to where you want them.
Yes. So I don't know if you can hear it that well, but that clicking noise, that'll be their claws clicking together when they move.
Neat. So
these are our babies.
Anna, do we have any quick questions we can put to Karly, or did she just cover so much information that we're all going, wow, I think I know them a lot better now?
I think there's only one question. It had to do with whether Santa's reindeers were all female, because they would have had antlers in December.
True. It's true.
So it sounds as if all Santa's reindeer were female, because the males would have lost their antlers by then. And not to be chauvinistic or anything, but really the women would find their way around the world a heck of a lot quicker. So we do have to end now. Unfortunately, we don't have any more time, but thank you, Karly. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Please stay tuned for our next Zoo View. We're so looking forward to having you join us. Amy, thank you for visiting. Thank the zookeepers, and please thank Snowflake and Holly for coming down when food was put out. We really appreciated that.
I absolutely will. Thanks for setting this all up.
Thank you.
So much, Karly. Wonderful.
Hope everyone has a wonderful day. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you all again soon. And hopefully the zoo will be open soon. All right. Bye.